Born January 10th, 1959 in Birmingham, Alabama, he served as a Winston Cup crew chief from 1985 through 2000, amassing 23 Cup Series wins, 21 poles, 122 top 5 finishes, 209 top 10 finishes with drivers Ricky Rudd, Brett Bodine, Davey Allison, Ernie Irvan, Dale Jarrett, Dale Earnhardt, and Mike Skinner. He's a two-time Daytona 500 champion crew chief, 1992 with Davey Allison and 1998 with Dale Earnhardt. Since 2001, he has served as an analyst for NASCAR on Fox, and he has also appeared in Talladega Nights and authored a book as well. We are happy to be joined tonight by America's crew chief, Larry McReynolds. Larry, welcome to the show.
No, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Going to be a great conversation. Looking forward to it. First question I always like to jump in and throw right out of the gate is, how did you catch the racing bug, Larry?
Well, it's kind of a unique story, and I'll give you the Cliff Note version because being from Birmingham, I was an only child. My family had no connections to racing whatsoever. But every Friday night at the local short track there in Birmingham, my grandfather, my mom's dad, and my aunt, my mom's sister, who was really probably more like a sister to me because she was the baby of the family. She was only 10 years older than I was. The three of us would go to the local short track race there in Birmingham every Friday night. And then my aunt ended up getting married. Her husband was a mechanic. He was a NASCAR fan, a race fan. So then the four of us would go. Well, I think it was like 1975. I was still in high school. They started a brand new division called a street stock hobby division. It was about as stock a race car as you could think about building. You took the windows out and the seats out, put a few roll bars in it, put the fuel tank up in the trunk, and lo and behold, put a number on it, you had a race car. Well, my aunt, she was a little bit of a hot rodder, and she told her husband, she said, I bet I could do that. Well, he kind of a little tongue-in-cheek and in a kind of a joking fashion said, well, I tell you what, go out and find you some sponsors, and we'll build you one. Well, she called his bluff, and I'm sure more because of being a female in a male-dominant sport, she went out and rounded up more sponsors, and we almost had room on the race car to put them all. And so my little racing career started in the basement of their house, helping her husband build her street stock hobby car. And I tell people all the time, racing is like a disease. It gets in your bloodstream, and there's no getting it out. So that's how it all kind of started there in my aunt and uncle's basement, building her street stock hobby car.
The short tracks are certainly the place to go. As somebody who's up there on Friday and Saturday nights at our local short track, I know all about that for sure. That's really, really cool. So you led some great drivers, of course, starting with Ricky Rudd. Talk to us a little bit about that first Cup Series win with Ricky in 1991 at Watkins Glen.
Well, it was actually in 1988, and when I made the decision to move to North Carolina, or to move to the Carolinas, it was actually first South Carolina, to pursue a NASCAR career. I had an opportunity to go to work for a brand new team that was starting in Greenville, South Carolina. They were going to run the full schedule in 1981. I guess I was just looking for somebody to kind of give me, it's okay, go do this, besides my mom and my dad, who was totally against it. So I went out to Hueytown and talked to Donnie Allison. And Donnie is very straightforward. He doesn't pull any punches. He doesn't massage your ears. He tells you what's on his mind. When I went out there and told him what I was thinking about doing, he looked at me dead in the eye, and he said, you know what, you need to go do it. But I'll tell you one damn thing. You better go find that checkered flag that you guys went out there at Birmingham the other night, because it's going to be a long time before you ever see another one. And how right that man was, because that was like middle of the summer in 1980, and it took all the way to 1988, basically 8 years before I found Victory Lane. And it was with King Racing, the 26 Quaker State car. Kenny Bernstein was the owner. We were in our third year with that team, but I knew anytime you went road course racing with Ricky Rudd, you had a good opportunity to win the race. We went to Riverside in June of '88. It was the last time we went there. We ended up finishing in top 5 after sitting on the pole, but then going to Watkins Glen the third year that the Cup Series had went there, started in 1986, and I knew not long into the weekend that the only group that could beat us is if we just beat ourselves, and I got that first win there with Ricky at Watkins Glenn.
You moved to Robert Yates Racing following that, and you worked with Davey Allison. Would love to hear about your time working with Robert Yates and Davey Allison, because those years were amazing.
Well, they really were. And when I made the move in very early 1991 to Robert Yates Racing, it was a career-making move. It put Larry McReynolds on the NASCAR map, because even though Kenny Bernstein gave us all the resources and everything we needed to win over there at King Racing, the 26 car, I just felt like we could never get it all synced together. We would get the cars right, the driver would do a good job, and we were having engine issues. We would get the engines right, the driver would do his job. We couldn't get the aero on the cars right. But there's no doubt, when I went to Robert Yates Racing, that 28 car and Davey Allison, it was game on. I mean, we finished second our very first race together at Darlington, and then we went on to win 5 races that year, and then came back and won 5 more races in 92, including the Daytona 500.
Talk to us a little bit about that 1992 Daytona 500.
Well, it was a very unique speed week. We took 2 cars down there, obviously. Our primary 500 car, and then we had our backup car. But we did something that nobody would even, you couldn't do it today, but because we don't even run the Clash at Daytona. But we decided to run our 500 car actually in the Clash. We felt like, what a better test session than to run it the weekend before in the Busch Clash. Well, we finished third in the Clash, and car was good, and we had some good notes in our notebook, and this plan was right on track until the last practice on Wednesday afternoon, the day before the qualifying races, was late in the practice session. Somebody lost an engine down in 1 and 2. Davey got in oil, and we hit the wall and destroyed our primary 500 car. So we had to unload a backup. We had to start at the rear of the field in the dual race. We finished, I think, third. We finished inside the top 5, and I knew with 2 more days to work on that car, we were going to be pretty good on Sunday. But it was pretty obvious in that race, it was going to be between the 2 Junior Johnson cars, Bill Elliott and Sterling Marlin, Ernie Irvan in the 4 car, and the 28. And they used to pay $10,000 to lead the halfway mark. And those 4 guys got to racing really hard trying to win that $10,000. 3 of the 4 got caught up in a wreck. We fortunately were the one that didn't get caught up in it, and I knew then if we just play our cards right and we're smart, we can win this race. And sure enough, it came to fruition.
Hey, Larry, talking about Davey Allison, and we're going to touch a difficult time here. 1993, Davey Allison passed way too soon. He was my favorite driver. I'm a little older than these other 2 guys here. And what was his potential? Because I swear, after 1992 almost winning, I saw him going to win 4 or 5 years in a row as a champion. He was that good.
He really was. He was smart. You know, I think a lot because of his upbringing there in Hueytown with his dad, Bobby Allison, his uncle, Donnie Allison, Red Farmer. There wasn't much on a race car that Davey didn't know about. I mean, he was smart when it came to the mechanics of it. He was smart when it came to the setup of it. And, you know, in just a little over 2 years, we won 11 races plus the 2 All-Star races. And I don't like to try to forecast or live in a what-if world, but I tell people all the time, I don't even think Davey Allison had come close to reaching his potential. I think the number of races, and quite honestly, probably the number of championships, was going to be a long list, but unfortunately, it got cut short after that helicopter crash on July 13th, 1993, and you know, we'll never have the answer to those questions about number of wins or number of championships.
After Davey's passing, you went and Ernie Irvan came into that 28 car, and you worked with, obviously, Dale Jarrett and Ernie, but Ernie was there for a little bit of time. Talk to us a little bit about your work with Ernie after he came in and, what that story was. Obviously, there was some wrecks, and Ernie's career was cut short in a sense, too, when you were working with him.
Yeah, I work with some talented race car drivers, very talented, very fortunate to the drivers I worked with. You kind of ran through the list earlier, probably most notably Davey Allison and Dale Earnhardt, who I was fortunate enough to win the 2 Daytona 500s with. But I'm going to tell you what, just as far as raw talent, being able to adapt to any situation, he didn't care what you did to the race car as long as you made it faster and drive better. I don't know that I worked with anybody as talented as Ernie Irvan. And honestly, even after he hit that wall, after blowing that right front tire at Michigan in a practice session in August of '94, yeah, when he came back, he probably wasn't quite where he was before that wreck. But I'm going to tell you what, he still was probably as good as 90% of the driver, just absolute raw talent. And it didn't take me long into our venture together to realize that. Our first race together was the 93 Southern 500. We finished fifth, I think, that day. A few weeks later, we led well over half the race at Martinsville and got that win, and a win I am very, very proud of. About a week or two later, the fall Charlotte race on the mile-and-a-half oval, we led 328 of 334 laps. The only laps we didn't lead was through the cycle of green flag pit stops. All I can tell you, that was one talented race car driver.
From another talented driver that you've worked with to another one, and the third name we bring up here, no pun intended, but Dale Earnhardt. And you worked with Dale after you left Robert Yates Racing. Talk to us a little bit about your relationship with Dale.
Yeah, there was a lot written, there was a lot said about our relationship, that we did not get along, that we were at each other a lot, and that was so untrue. We were absolutely great friends up until the day he passed away, the day of the 2001 Daytona 500, but we just had different personalities, and, we just didn't think together as a driver and a crew chief. We got along, but we just had different philosophies about race cars. And I think Richard Childers finally acknowledged that halfway through the 98 season, and that's when he made the crew chief swap, moving me to Mike Skinner and moving Kevin Hamlin to Dale Earnhardt. And it was the right thing to do, because I think my high-strung personality was much better suited for Mike Skinner, and Kevin Hamlin, being a very laid-back individual, he was more suited for Dale Earnhardt. We see it all the time. Just because a driver and a crew chief does not have success together, it doesn't make him one I'm a bad driver or one I'm a bad crew chief. It's just the chemistry just was not there. But no matter what, I walk by that trophy case with that 1998 Daytona 500 trophy in it, and I smile every day I look at it.
Yeah, that's certainly a shining accomplishment, helping Dale get to that illustrious Daytona 500 in 1998, a race I remember watching. Take us through that weekend and tell us a little bit, a couple stories from the 98 Daytona 500 weekend.
Well, we built that car during the summer of 1997. Before the calendar year of 1998, we had already been in the wind tunnel with that car 2 or 3 times. It had already been to Talladega and tested several times. Dale never even drove it until we went testing at Daytona in January of 98. But we would go to Talladega with Mike Dillon, Richard's son-in-law, Dave Marcus tested it. And every time we tested it, it had everything right about it. It drove good. It had decent speed, just everything about it. And I know when Dale first drove it at the January Daytona test, he came in and that old Cheshire cat grin, he said, this thing's going to be good. What he really liked about that car, which is what made it so good, is with a restrictor plate that we ran back then, if you turn the steering wheel, it would scrub speed. You'd always see the RPM go down in the corner because you were turning the steering wheel. You had to. there was something about the body on this car, and we could never duplicate it. We didn't have the resources back then that they have today to be able to duplicate one body after another and pretty much be spot on. But there was something about the way the body was on this car that when he would turn it off in the corner, it didn't lose any RPM. It wasn't the fastest car in Daytona that year. I think we qualified 10th, but he loved the way that car drove. And it's almost like the deeper we got into Speed Week, the better that car got. The more the track slickened up, which it always does with all the different series there, the car just seemed like it drove better. And we won the dual race, the qualifying race on Thursday, and Dale had gotten a little bit of a stomach bug. And I knew he didn't feel good. In fact, when we won the qualifying race on Thursday, he even sat down on the ground beside the race car in Victory Lane because he felt that bad. So after we kind of took pictures and all that in Victory Lane, I looked at him. I said, "You don't feel good, do you?" He said, "I absolutely feel like I've been hit by a truck." I said, "All right, here's what we're going to do. We got 2 practices tomorrow on Friday. Then we got happy hour on Saturday. Final practice after the Xfinity Series race." I said, "Tomorrow, why don't we skip the morning practice? You sleep in, maybe even go over to the hospital or the infield care center and see if they can give you something. We'll go ahead and put our 500 race engine in, and then we'll run a few laps tomorrow afternoon. Just make sure everything runs well, no leaks, everything's good, and then we'll get serious in final practice on Saturday." And he said, "That sounds like the best idea I've heard all week." Well, it was a great plan until about 30 minutes before the afternoon practice on Friday. One of those afternoon Florida thunderstorms rolled in, and that practice ended up getting scratched. Well, we're okay. We still got an hour final practice, so we just kind of went through our checklist the rest of the day, Friday, Saturday morning, and then when we got ready to start that practice, he didn't even get down pit road good. He said, "Something's wrong with this engine." And he came back around, came back in, didn't even run a lap, didn't even get up to speed. And, you know, the engine guys would raise the hood. They make sure there wasn't a plug wire left off or something. They changed the spark plugs out, looked at everything, sent him back out. He gets about halfway down the back straightaway, doesn't even really get to high gear. He said, "Guys, I'm telling you, something is wrong with this engine." So he came back in, and I'm getting nervous now because we have not turned a lap since the qualifying race on Thursday, and I'm looking at my watch. Happy hour is already about halfway over. So the guys pull the valve covers off. They look at rock arms. Sure enough, we had a broke rocker arm and a bent push rod. They very meticulously changed those out, ran through all the valves, changed all the spark plugs out. We got back out there with about 20 minutes to go, and the car was probably the best it had been all week. But I'm a big why person, and I wanted to make sure I knew we were making the right decision on this engine. That's why we have spare engines. So we made the decision to change the engine out and put our spare engine in there. We were working with the guys back at the shop in Welcome, North Carolina, Spenny Clendenin, the head engine guy, our engine guys at the track. So when we dropped the green flag on that race on Sunday, that was a brand-new engine in that 3 car, but it got the job done.
A little over 20 years after you won with Dale, you got to work with another Earnhardt and Jeffrey, Talladega 2022 in the Xfinity Series. I mean, you guys had a great day, sat on the pole, led 10 laps, P2 finish. How was it getting back on the box after that long and working with Richard Childress again?
Well, when I got the call from Austin Dillon, and this would have been in the spring 2 years ago of 22, it's like you couldn't make this up, because here I am, Talladega, my home track, Richard Childress Racing, where I finished up my crew chief career in 2000, the 3 car, and an Earnhardt. You couldn't have scripted it any better. And yeah, to go down there and sit on the pole, came so close. The moves that kid made on that final lap, he almost got it done. We ended up finishing second to Noah Gragson, driving for Dale Earnhardt Jr., I might add. But the irony is that would have been 2022. If you back it up 25 years earlier, 1997, the spring race at Talladega. You can't make this stuff up. The spring race at Talladega, I'm with his grandfather in the 3-car at Talladega, and guess what? We finished second. And to spin it ahead 25 years later, and I'm now on the box crew chief and his grandson, and we finished second, it almost gives me cold chills when I think about it and talk about it.
That is absolutely. I didn't even realize that, actually. That's really, really cool. So, since 2001, you've been with not only Fox, but you did time with TNT. Talk to us a little bit about your time working for NASCAR on Fox for as long as you have now.
Well, it's hard to believe. This is my 24th year to be with NASCAR on Fox. This is the 24th year for Fox to have NASCAR. And, you know, I never saw myself being an analyst for TV. I thought I'd be a crew chief till probably the day they put me 6 foot under. So when I got the opportunity and got the call from the chairman of Fox Sports about a year out before they started in 2001, it was a very scary decision. It was a very, very tough decision. It's one of the hardest decisions I've ever made. But I've got to say it's a decision I made now roughly 25 years ago that I've never looked back on. I love what I do. I feel like most days of races, I'm crew chief for all the teams. I just don't have to take the hit for a bad call on Sunday from a car owner like I used to for all those years. But I love what I do. Again, 24 years, and honestly, I hope I'm doing it for a long time from now because I hit the ground running and truly, you know, most people go through life and they maybe don't feel like they had one fulfilling career. I have to pinch myself being from Birmingham, Alabama, barely having a high school diploma, and being able to say I've actually had 2 fulfilling careers, one as a crew chief and now 24 years as a broadcast analyst for NASCAR.
Hey, Larry, I'm a weekend racer, and I have a young son, and I realize myself someday I'm going to pass those reins on to him when he gets a little bit older. Tell us what it's like watching your son make his way up through the ranks.
Well, unfortunately, Brandon McReynolds, my son you're speaking about, you know, he's no longer driving. He had a great, you might call it, amateur career. You know, he never drove a race car to make a living. Everything he ever raced in, he pretty much won, as far as Bandoleros, Allison Legacy cars, UARA late model. And then seeing him win the ARCA race at Talladega in 2012, that's one I'll never, ever forget because he was born in 1991. And in the summer of 1992, early summer, we won the race with Davey Allison there. He was just barely a year old. He was in victory lane. I'm sure he doesn't remember a whole lot about that. But then to spin it ahead 20 years later, and he was in his mom's arms in victory lane in a baby blanket in 1992. 20 years later, that kid drives a car into victory lane, kind of like the Earnhardt deal, 25 years apart. It's almost like you can't script this, but, you know, I don't have any regrets because I feel like, you know, God has a plan for your life and your family. But if I have one regret, I just regret I never could make it happen for him because he came along at a time where the only way you really were going to be able to run truck races or Xfinity Series races or really even a full ARCA schedule is you were going to have to walk through the door with a good resume and you were going to have to walk through the door with a check. And we just never had the resources to do that. But I'm proud of him. He's found a way to stay in the sport and be relative. He spots for Ross Chastain in the Cup Series. He spots for Parker Kligerman in Xfinity. And then he's part of an agency called Clear 28 Agency that manages drivers like Noah Gragson, Cole Custer, Sam Mayer, Jack Wood. So he's found a way to be a part of NASCAR, and I'm very proud of what he's accomplished.
And not to mention, he had you join him in victory lane up in New Hampshire a couple of years ago when he won a race up here. Still in, I believe it was Busch North Series, or I K&N East?
Well, it was what was then known as the K&N Series East. Now it's the Arca Menard Series East. And what was cool about that, I was actually spotting for him that day.
Life comes full circle for sure. So 2 more questions before we let you get out of here tonight. As somebody who's going to pop their cherry going to Talladega in a couple of weeks, what advice do you have for me?
Stay out of the infield if you want to enjoy the race. Or you might not remember the race on Sunday, the Boulevard. But no, Talladega is a great place to go. You try to describe what racing is like at Daytona and Talladega. You know, people watch it on TV, and hopefully we do a good job of conveying what's going on the broadcast. But honestly, there is nothing like being there and watching those 36, 38 drivers go through those, 31-degree banking, 3 wide, about 8 rows deep. And more than likely, that's the way they'll come down the front straightaway through the tri-oval to take the checkered flag.
We've been speaking with Larry McReynolds, 2-time Daytona 500 champion crew chief, and, of course, nowadays with NASCAR on Fox. Final question for you tonight, Larry. When it's all said and done, how do you want to be remembered to the racing fans?
That I always treated everybody like I wanted to be treated, whether it was when I was a crew chief, with fans, with my crew members, and the same thing as a broadcaster now. But the biggest thing I want to be remembered is that no matter when I was a crew chief, whether I won or lost, or whether today as a broadcaster, whether you enjoy what I do or don't enjoy what I do, that people will look at me and go, that guy gave 100% every single day at everything he ever did.
Larry McReynolds joining us right here on Miles on Motorsports to kick off the show tonight here on 95.9 WATD.